A bully grabbed the wrong girl, then John Cena and The Rock showed up. Watch till the end. Like, subscribe, and comment. The morning at Ridgewood High began as it always did, with a current of noise that filled every corner of the building. The sound of sneakers squeaking on polished floors, the clash of locker doors, the rising tide of chatter and laughter created a chaotic rhythm that pulled everyone along. To most students, this was nothing more than another ordinary school day. But to Mia Cena, it was another battle in her quiet war to remain unseen. Mia clutched her books tightly against her chest, her steps careful and deliberate as she moved down the hallway. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat ponytail, her eyes lowered just enough to avoid drawing attention, but not so much that she looked timid. She had mastered the art of blending in, of sliding through groups without catching notice, of sitting in the back row of class where she could disappear into the shadows. To her classmates, she was quiet, distant, maybe even strange. What they didn't know, what she tried very hard to keep them from knowing, was her last name, Cena. Everyone knew it once it was spoken aloud. The name carried with it an echo of arenas, blinding lights, and roaring crowds. Her uncle, John Cena, was a man the world recognized instantly. To some, he was a wrestler, to others an actor, to many both a hero and a symbol. To Mia, he was simply Uncle John, the man who sat across from her at family dinners, who once carried her on his shoulders when she was small, who always told her to keep her head high and her heart steady. But inside these school walls, his shadow loomed over her. It wasn't that she was ashamed. She loved her uncle deeply, but she feared the way people treated her when they knew. The endless questions, the bad jokes, the mocking comparisons. Can you even lift like him? Do you wrestle at home? She had learned long ago that it was easier to stay quiet, to let her classmates see her as an ordinary girl. Invisibility, she had decided, was safer. She reached her locker and carefully spun the combination. The metal handle was cool beneath her hand. Inside, wedged between textbooks and binders, was a small leather-bound journal. It was her secret sanctuary. On its pages, she wrote fragments of poems, little sketches, and even reflections on the words her uncle often shared with her, about discipline, respect, and strength. When the noise of school threatened to crush her, the journal steadied her. As she pulled out a book, the faint corner of a photo caught her eye. It was a snapshot from a summer trip, a picture of her smiling with John, his arm slung warmly around her shoulder. For a second, warmth spread through her chest. Then she quickly shut the locker door, careful not to let anyone see. The risk of being caught with that picture in plain view was too high. The halls were plastered with bright posters bearing slogans, "Be the change," "Stand up for what's right," "Respect everyone." Their corners curled slightly from the tape, the bold letters bright against the drab beige walls. Mia glanced at them as she walked, wondering if anyone really believed them. To her, they seemed like decorations, hollow reminders in a place where silence often carried more weight than action. The first classes of the day passed in the same haze as always. Teachers lecturing from behind desks, students whispering in the back, the occasional giggle breaking the monotony. Mia sat quietly in her seat, writing notes in the margins of her notebook, small words that no one else would ever see. Stand tall, even when you feel small. Strength is not in shouting, but in standing. By the time lunch arrived, the unease that always lingered in her chest had only grown heavier. She carried her tray to a quiet corner, away from the thrum of conversations and laughter. While others surrounded themselves with friends, she opened her journal and began scribbling lines. Her handwriting trembled slightly as she wrote, "Discipline is not noise. Strength is not cruelty. Silence can be survival." But even in her solitude, she felt eyes on her. A group of boys at another table laughed suddenly, their gazes flicking in her direction before they turned back to each other, snickering. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. She knew the tone, the cruel smirk, the way they leaned close as if sharing some private joke about her. Her stomach twisted. She lowered her head, pressing her pen to the page as though writing harder could drown out the sting of their attention. The rest of the day passed, but the heaviness never left. As she walked home that afternoon, backpack heavy on her shoulders, she thought about the weight of her uncle's name. It was strange how it could make her untouchable in some people's eyes, but a target in others. She had learned to survive by keeping her head down, but a small voice inside her whispered that it couldn't last forever. That night, she sat by her bedroom window, her lamp casting a soft glow across the desk. Downstairs, she could hear her parents talking, her uncle's voice steady and calm among them. She thought about going down, about telling him how she felt at school, about how the laughter cut deep, and the silence hurt even more. But the words caught in her throat before she even rose from the chair. She didn't want to disappoint him, she didn't want to seem weak, so instead she wrote. Her pen scratched across the page as she filled the journal with words she could not say aloud. Finally, she paused, her hand trembling slightly as she finished a sentence. I don't want to be invisible, but I don't know how to be seen. She stared at the words for a long moment before closing the journal and setting it aside. The night deepened, the house grew still, and yet her mind refused to rest. She lay awake, her thoughts circling endlessly around the same fear, that her silence would one day draw the wrong kind of attention, and though she could not yet see it, that fear was about to become real. Somewhere in the crowded hallways of Ridgewood High, someone had already decided she was different. Someone had already marked her as a target. A storm was gathering in the shadows of her ordinary days, and soon it would break across her world in a way she could never have imagined. The next week at Ridgewood unfolded with the same clatter of lockers and chatter, but for Mia, the air felt heavier, like the hallways had thickened around her. She noticed it in small ways first, how conversations seemed to pause as she passed, how the laughter behind her lingered one beat too long, how shoes shuffled as if making room not for her, but for something that was closing in. Her name didn't have to be said aloud. She could feel it traveling through the corridors like a draft under a door. He appeared as if the school itself had conjured him. Jason Miller, tall and broad-shouldered, a practiced smirk set like a badge across his face. His hair had that careless perfection that required attention. His backpack hung off one shoulder like it belonged to someone who never feared it would fall. Everyone knew him, not because he was clever in class or kind on teams. Jason was known for a different currency entirely. He had a way of owning space. Teachers quieted when he slouched in late. Students cleared paths when he moved through a crowd. He was gravity for the kind of student who craved permission to be cruel. Mia had seen him 100 times without being seen. Background of her days, distant thunder. The first time he really looked at her, it was like the hallway tilted. He didn't speak. His eyes flicked from her face to the journal in her arms and back again, and the corner of his mouth curled. He had found something. Or rather, he had found someone. By third period, the rumor had already circulated that Jason had a new project. That was the word his friends used. Project, like cruelty, could be a science fair entry. It made the students lean into the day with a hungry curiosity, the kind that tastes like metal on the tongue. Mia felt it without knowing why. She moved more quickly between classes. She waited longer before stepping into a crowded hall. She kept her journal tucked deep in her backpack and looped the strap twice around her wrist as if paper and cardboard could be stolen like breath. It began as if by accident. Between the chemistry lab and the stairwell, the hallway narrowed into a funnel where people got stuck. Mia was nearly through when Jason stepped sideways. His shoulder made contact with hers, deliberate, measured. Her book slipped, papers fanned against the floor. He kept walking 2 steps, stopped like he remembered something, then turned back and crouched. "Let me help," he said, and his voice was warm the way sugar is warm before it burns. He collected a handful of worksheets, stacked them neatly, and then, as if by pure coincidence, placed them just out of her reach on the bench behind him. His friends laughed softly, a sound like a match strike. Mia swallowed, reached past his knee, and he shifted an inch so her fingertips met air. "Careful," he murmured, amusement rolling beneath the word. "Thanks," she said, and the word came out thin. He stood, slid the papers into a single stack, and handed them to her with a smile that showed too many teeth. It would have been nothing if it had ended there. But it didn't. At lunch, she reached for her tray and found it already moved 3 steps down the counter. A boy she didn't know lifted his hands, grinning, as if she were lucky he hadn't moved it farther. In English, a pencil landed on her desk with a snap and rolled off before she could catch it. When she bent to pick it up, a second pencil fell. Then a third. Snickers fluttered in the row behind her. She kept her face still. She had practiced that for years, the art of giving nothing to anyone who wanted a reaction, but inside her pulse ran like a bird trapped behind glass. The next day, Jason chose a corner of the main hall where the afternoon sunlight turned the linoleum into a mirror. He was leaning against a locker when she approached, his friends arranged around him like furniture. They weren't talking. They were waiting. "Hey," he said, as if they were friends. "You're Mia, right?" She nodded once. The crowd behind him adjusted its stance. The hinge of a phone clicked open. A camera lens blinked. "Nice notebook," he said, pointing to the spine peeking from her half-zipped backpack. "You write things?" "It's for class," she lied. "Cool," he said, as if the conversation were about weather. "Mind if I see?" She shook her head, stepped sideways, felt the brush of a sleeve that shouldn't have been there. The zipper tugged. The journal slid. It was a clean motion, as if he'd rehearsed it on invisible practice runs through the day. "Whoa," Jason said, catching it mid-fall in a palm. "Almost dropped it. Good thing I've got quick hands." He flipped it open before she could speak. His eyes traveled across the page, not reading so much as indexing, skimming until they found something that lit the smirk again. "Strength is a control. Discipline is the quiet kind of courage," he read, and then he lifted his gaze to her. "You write fortune cookies?" His friends laughed. The sound rippled outward. 2 phones rose higher. "Please, give it back," she said. Her voice was steady, a small win. "Of course," he said, turning a page. "Just want to see if you've got a poem about me. I'm amused sometimes." There were sketches in the margins, trees with long roots, a pair of hands unclenching, a corridor drawn in short, harsh lines. He tapped a finger against one. "What's this? Your path to glory?" he said. "Or a map to wherever you hide when anyone looks at you?" The words were designed to be small knives, clean edges. He had practice. "Give it back," Mia said, and the steadiness trembled. Jason smiled wider and read another line, sing-song, a child's chant made mean. "Stand tall, even when you feel small. That's adorable." A girl in the semicircle flinched. "Jason," she said under her breath. "Maybe." He didn't turn. "Maybe what?" "Nothing," she said quickly, and her mouth pressed into a line. He flicked to a fresh page, found a single sentence underlined twice. "Silence can be survival." He held it up so the phones could see, his voice lowering to a mock tender, "Aw, she's profound." Something in the crowd shifted. Unease, not mercy. They could smell the bleed that comes just before escalation. Mia reached, but he angled his shoulder and the book moved with him, living in the space between his body and her need. "Say please," he whispered. "Please," she said. He blinked slowly, theatrically touched, then closed the journal and kept hold of it. "You're polite. That's nice. Polite is cute." The second insult was smaller than the first. It didn't need to be bigger. It only needed to be next. This was choreography. Step, pause, step. "Jason," she said, and the syllables scraped her throat. "I said, please." "And I heard you," he replied. "I'm trying to help. You can't keep things safe if you carry them like this." He pressed the journal flat in his hands and began peeling at the corner of a page. It was a tiny motion, almost absent-minded. The paper gave with a soft tear. The sound, to Mia, was louder than laughter. "Oops," he said softly. Page was weak. The tear wasn't large. It didn't need to be. It was proof of access, the first nick when you want to see if the dam will hold. He turned another page, eyes scanning. A half-finished poem, a list of lines she loved, a quote about applying force only where needed. He read 2 words and chuckled. "Mercy matters. That's cute. Do they teach that in your, what is it, family?" He handed the thought to the air, bait wrapped in sugar. He didn't know her last name, not yet, but he wanted to see what twitched when he tugged. Mia stared at the journal, not his face. If she watched the pages, she could keep from watching the crowd. If she kept her eyes there, she could pretend it was only 2 people in an empty hall. Her palms sweated. The strap of her backpack felt like a rope in her fist. "Give it back," she said, the third time an unsteady echo. "Sure," he said, "after you answer a question." "Why do you hide?" She didn't answer. He leaned in a fraction, took the silence as permission to keep talking. "I mean, you're not ugly," he said thoughtfully, as if doing her a favor. "You're just background. People look at you and forget 2 seconds later. I'm trying to help you be memorable." He turned another page and set his thumb against the edge. The paper held, then began to yield. The rip was cleaner this time, a thin line across a stanza she had revised 5 times. It felt like a string snapping inside her sternum. "Hey," someone said behind him, a boy's voice low and strained. Come on, man, that's her stuff." Jason's head tilted a fraction, not enough to be a turn. "You volunteering for a starring role?" The boy looked at his friends and swallowed. "You just mean nothing," Jason said pleasantly, "which is fine. Most people do." The boy's friends laughed and elbowed him. He shut his mouth and faded backward into the ring that contained them all, even the ones who wanted to pretend otherwise. Mia's throat tightened. Anger rose beneath the fear, but it didn't have a path yet. Anger needs oxygen. The crowd stole it. She reached out again. He stepped back, a smooth choreography they were writing together without consent. The lens of a phone glinted like an eye. Jason rubbed his thumb over the crease of the torn page, then closed the journal with a clap that made 3 kids flinch. "Tell you what," he said, "I'll hold this for you. Keep it safe. Bring it back when you learn how to carry it properly." "That's not yours," Mia said. The words came out too sharp and the circle tightened as if the sound itself was a cue. "Everything here is mine when I decide it is," he replied, easy, practiced. "That's how this works." He tucked the journal under his arm and turned his back on her as if she had already been dismissed. His friends pivoted with him, a small procession, and the corridor seemed to fold, opening space where they walked and closing behind them like water. Mia stood very still until they reached the corner. When they disappeared, the hallway exhaled, A flutter of whispers, a laugh that broke too loudly, then died, a sneaker squeaking across linoleum. She crossed the remaining steps to her next class in a fog that tasted like aluminum and paper dust. She kept her face blank. It was the only part of her that felt within her control. That night, she sat at her desk and stared at the empty spot where the journal should have been. The room felt wrong without its weight on the wood, without the familiarity of opening to a page where her own handwriting steadied her. She reached for a spiral notebook and tried to write there instead, but the lines rejected it. The words came out thin and uneven. They looked like strangers on the page. She closed the notebook, pressed her palms against her eyes until stars danced in the dark, and counted her breaths the way her uncle had taught her. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The rhythm calmed the tremble, but not the ache. The next morning, she arrived early, hoping to catch Jason before first period and barter for a return. She rehearsed sentences that weren't apologies, but sounded like ones. I need it for class. There's nothing interesting in there. You proved your point. When she rounded the corner by the trophy case, she saw him before he saw her, his back to the glass, the journal open in his hands. He was reading to 2 of his friends, his voice low and animated, as if he were sharing a joke that got better the more he told it. If strength is only loud, it isn't strong at all, he read, then laughed. She's really into this stuff, like she's training to be a monk. One of his friends smirked. Or a failed superhero. Mia walked straight toward them before her courage could rot. I need it back, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was there. Jason lifted his eyes above the top edge of the journal and smiled as if she had arrived right on time. He closed the book with the same practiced clap. I have good news, he said. You get a chance to earn it. I don't need a chance, she said. I need my property. He nodded thoughtfully, as if grading her sentence. Here's the thing about property, he said. It's a social agreement. And socially, Jason, she interrupted, surprising herself, stop. For the first time, the smirk wavered. Not because she had frightened him, but because the script had changed. He tapped the journal against his thigh, then held it out flat between them. Here, he said. Take it. She reached. As her fingers touched the cover, he let the journal drop. It hit the floor with a slap and slid under the lip of the trophy case. She crouched, reached, pulled it free. Dust clung to the corner where he had torn a page. When she stood, he had stepped closer. Too close. You should say thank you, he murmured. Thank you, she said, and hated the way the words tasted, like she had swallowed a coin. He leaned in, breath carrying the faintest sting of mint. You're welcome. She hugged the journal to her chest with both arms and pivoted away. She had taken only 3 steps when his voice chased her. Hey, poet, he called. You forgot something. She turned. He tossed a page, one of the torn sheets, like confetti. It fluttered in a lazy arc and landed face up at her feet. Her own handwriting stared back at her, a stanza cut in half by a rip. Behind the words, the footprints of a dozen students crossed like scars. The day curdled after that. In history, someone behind her muttered poet every time she raised her hand. In math, a paper airplane landed on her desk. The folded wing bore a lopsided heart and the words, Be my quiet girl, scrawled inside. She crumpled it and slipped it into her pocket, a heat rising in her that had nowhere to go. Heat like that can seduce you into foolishness. She kept her gaze on the chalkboard and breathed in 4s. It might have ended as a cruel day and nothing more if not for the moment just before last bell, when the hallways flooded and the school shifted from the language of sentences to the language of bodies. Mia turned from her locker with the journal tucked under her arm and nearly collided with Jason. It wasn't an accident. He was a wall when he wanted to be. "Hey," he said softly, and the softness felt like oil. "We're not done." "I don't care," she said, and the truth in it gave her a centimeter of height. He reached for the journal again. She pivoted away and clutched it tighter. His fingers closed on the strap of her backpack instead, and with a single practiced yank, he slid it from her shoulder. The weight fell to the floor with a thud. The zipper split like a grin, and pens and papers spilled in a scatter of color and noise. Phones lifted. 2, then 5, then 10. The circle formed with the instinct of habit. It always knows its shape. "Come on," someone whispered behind a camera. "Do something." Jason bent, slow and theatrical, and picked up a Polaroid that had tumbled loose from the journal's inner pocket. A photo of the back of a head with a baseball cap, Mia's smile bright beside it. He held the picture up between 2 fingers. "Aw," he said. "Family day. Adorable. Who's the lucky guy? Boyfriend? Brother? Coach?" Mia's mouth went dry. She didn't answer. She couldn't trust her voice not to tremble. "No," he pressed, grin sharpening. "Mystery man. Cute. Tell you what, why don't we make this memorable?" He let the photo fall. It drifted for a breath, then landed on the tile face up. He looked down at it, lifted his sneaker, and lowered it until the rubber kissed the paper. He didn't step. Not yet. He watched Mia's face. The crowd held still with him, 100 lungs waiting for the moment breath turns into sound. "Don't," she said, and the word scratched her throat as it left. He smiled. Then, slowly, like he was teaching a lesson, he pressed down. The corner of the photo wrinkled under his weight, a crease spidering through the white border. He lifted his foot just enough to show the damage, then set it down again, heavier. The second crease cracked through the printed light like lightning in a summer storm. "Oops," he said gently. A sound came from Mia that she didn't recognize as her own, a soft, broken inhale. She crouched, reached for the edge of the photo. He shifted his foot to pin the top corner, and the picture bucked under him like a living thing. "Please," she said. It was a plea without decoration. A girl near the front flinched. "Jason, that's enough," she said, louder this time. He turned his head an inch. "You want to help? Step in." Her eyes flicked to the lenses aimed from 3 angles. She froze. He looked back down. "Pick it up," he told Mia, and then, when she reached again, he slid the photo just out of reach with the edge of his sole. "No, not like that. Crawl for it." Laughs leaked out, brittle and thin. Not everyone joined. Not everyone stopped. That is how crowds work when they are learning which version of themselves they want to believe. Mia's hands shook. She felt very small and very visible at the same time. The journal was a weight against her ribs. For one hot second she considered using it, bringing the cardboard spine down across his ankle, the way you swat a fly that refuses to leave. But the thought died before it formed into action. Violence would feed something she couldn't control. She had learned that in the quiet of her room and in the steady cadence of a voice she trusted. Control is the only kind of strength that lasts. She reached again, slower. He let her fingers brush the paper, then lifted his foot and stepped back 2 inches, granting the smallest victory as if it were his to give. She snatched the photo, cradled it against her chest, her breath hiccuping in little broken pulls. Jason watched her for a long heartbeat. The smirk returned, not wider, but sharper, honed. "This is going to be fun," he said softly, so that only she and the nearest phones would hear. "You make a good audience." He pivoted, and the circle pivoted with him. The phones tilted, a last sweep to capture her face, the bent photograph, the way her shoulders drew inward like wings bracing for weather. Then the ring dissolved into late bell and homework and plans for Friday, as if a performance had ended and everyone had places to be. Mia stood alone beside the locker, knuckles white around paper and cardboard, chest tight with the knowledge that something had shifted inside the day and would not shift back. The first shove, the first tear, the first pressed heel. They weren't incidents. They were steps, a pattern, a path laid out not to be tripped over, but to be followed. As she slid the creased photo into the journal and zipped it closed, she understood it with a clarity that stung. This wasn't a tension that would pass. This was a selection. Jason hadn't just noticed her. He had chosen her. Hunting season had started, and the hallways already knew the script. By the time the week bled into Friday, the tension inside Ridgewood High had thickened to something Mia could feel pressing against her ribs. She moved faster through hallways now, hugging her journal tight against her chest, but it didn't matter. The air itself seemed to anticipate what was coming. Students glanced at her and looked away quickly, as though avoiding the sight of a storm forming above her head. It happened in the main hallway, the one lined with rows of metal lockers that clanged like drums whenever someone slammed a door shut. The sun cut sharp squares of light through the tall windows, falling across the floor like bright stage lights. It was here that Jason Miller decided the performance would peak. Mia had just bent to place a textbook into her locker when she felt a shadow stretch across her. She turned and froze. Jason was there, his grin sharper than ever, two of his friends flanking him. Around them, bodies shifted instinctively, forming a wide semicircle. Phones rose from pockets, screens lighting up, lenses catching every angle. The silence that settled wasn't peace. It was appetite. Jason didn't waste time with words. He reached into the open locker, yanked out the photograph Mia kept tucked carefully between her books, a simple Polaroid of her smiling with her Uncle John, his baseball cap pulled low, his arm around her shoulder. It wasn't meant for anyone else's eyes. Jason dangled it between two fingers, raising his brows like he'd uncovered buried treasure. "Well, look at this," he said. His voice carried easily over the hush. "Little Mia with her mystery man. Who is he? Brother? Boyfriend? Or are we looking at your dad? Cute." Mia's throat closed. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Jason smiled wider. He let the photo slip from his fingers, fluttering toward the floor. Then he set his sneaker gently on top of it. Not pressing, not yet. Just letting the weight hover. The crowd leaned forward, breath held, cameras steady. "Oops," Jason whispered theatrically. "Didn't mean to step on it. Guess you should hurry and pick it up." Mia's chest tightened. She crouched, reaching for the edge of the photo. At the last second, Jason pressed down. The rubber of his sneaker ground into the paper, the corner of the image bending under the pressure. A jagged crease shot across the printed surface, splitting her uncle's smile. Laughter burst out, but it wasn't full laughter. It was jagged, nervous, the kind that hides unease. "Don't," Mia whispered, her voice breaking. "Please." Jason tilted his head as if considering mercy, then shifted his weight heavier. The sound of the paper giving way was small, but in the silence of the hallway, it might as well have been thunder. Someone near the front whispered, "That's enough," but the voice was swallowed by the ring of phones. The crowd didn't move. They recorded. They watched. Their silence was louder than the noise had been. Jason crouched now, bringing his face level with hers. His breath smelled faintly of mint, his eyes glinting with delight. "Pick it up," he said, pressing his shoe harder into the picture. "Come on, poet, crawl for it." Mia's eyes burned. She reached again, and again the photo slid just out of reach under the sole of his shoe. The humiliation was no longer in the words, but in the stillness of everyone else, their refusal to stop him, their choice to let her bend and break alone. She heard the clicks of phone cameras, the whisper of laughter behind hands. No one stepped forward. Not one. Their silence wrapped around her like a second set of chains. At last, Jason lifted his foot just enough to let her fingers scrape the edge. She snatched the photograph and clutched it to her chest, her breathing shallow, her face pale. The photo was bent, cracked through the middle, but it was hers again. Jason leaned close, his voice soft enough for only her and the nearest phones to hear, "You're perfect. You make this so much fun." Then he stood and turned away, the circle breaking open for him as if the hallway itself bent to his will. Students drifted back toward lockers and classrooms, slipping their phones into pockets, whispering about what they'd caught. Mia remained on the floor for a moment, the torn photo pressed against her heart, her knuckles white. When she finally stood, her hands shook so badly she could barely close her locker. The silence of the crowd clung to her heavier than Jason's grip ever could. It wasn't just his cruelty that burned, it was their choice to let it happen. And as she walked toward her next class, her vision blurring, one truth carved itself into her mind with painful clarity. She wasn't just fighting Jason. She was fighting the silence of everyone who stood by and did nothing. The corridor after lunch was a river. Bodies flowed, swelled, then slowed as they reached the bend where the main hallway widened beneath a row of bright windows. It should have been nothing more than the restless shuffle of a school at half-day, but the air had a different pitch now, thin, high, as if stretched to a breaking point only some ears could hear. Mia felt it first as a pressure along her ribs. She kept the journal under her arm and the creased photograph tucked inside its back cover, a hand pressed to both as if they were a single fragile organ she needed to protect. She turned the corner and stopped. Jason was already there. He had chosen the brightest slice of floor. Sunlight laid a sharp rectangle at his feet, painting him into the space like a figure on a stage. Two friends flanked him, arms folded, eyes already scanning for lenses. They didn't have to look far. Phones were out before anything happened, the way umbrellas appear at the whisper of rain. The semicircle formed with the precision of practice, a crescent of faces, screens angled like mirrors. Jason didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He reached, quick, invasive, and snatched the journal from beneath Mia's arm. The clap of cardboard against his palm made 3 kids flinch. He didn't open it this time. He held it by the spine with 2 fingers, let it dangle, let gravity bow its pages so the private edges flashed, intimate as a pulse. "Round 2, he said softly. Mia grabbed for it. He lifted his hand just out of reach, smiling as if indulging a child. Then he lowered the journal slowly, like he might be merciful, and Mia's breath hitched, and at the last inch, he let it fall. The book slapped the tile and skidded, stopping against the rubber toe of his sneaker. "Oops," he murmured, then placed his shoe lightly on the corner. The crowd inhaled in one ragged, shared breath. This time, the laughter didn't come. It was softer than yesterday, thinner, as if the weight of what was happening had finally found their throats. And still the phone stayed up, and still no one moved. "Pick it up," Jason said, not looking at the journal but at Mia's face, measuring the way shame rearranged it. "Knees. Let's not waste the audience's time." Mia's mouth opened, then closed. She knelt because she didn't know what else there was to do that wouldn't feed him something worse. The sunlight made the floor hot through her jeans. Her hand hovered, waiting for the last second when his shoe might lift. Her chest had shrunk to a tight box, There wasn't space in it for anything but air that wouldn't come. A new sound cut the room. Not a shout, not a slam. Footsteps, 2 sets, heavy, even, unhurried, a rhythm that didn't match the school's terrified pulse. They came from the far end of the corridor, deeper than sneaker squeaks, thicker than the chatter that had fallen to static. The semicircle's rear rank turned first, then the middle rows, then the front. Heads shifted. A path opened, the way heat opens air. John Cena stepped into the rectangle of sun. Next to him, broader still, came Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. They didn't look like an answer. They looked like the end of a question that never should have been asked. For a beat, the corridor didn't make a sound. It felt absurdly like the building itself inhaled. Mia didn't stand. Her body refused the command. She only turned her head and saw the faces she had known her whole life from screens and living rooms and family tables and holiday photos, and for a second her vision blurred with something that looked like relief and felt like heat. Jason's shoe remained on the journal. His eyes flicked from Mia to the men and back, as if some calculation had started in him but was missing a variable he didn't know how to name. John didn't raise his voice. He didn't need volume. He had gravity. "Let your foot off the book," he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a line drawn so clearly that the space on either side of it felt like different countries. Jason blinked. Once, twice, like his body needed time to translate words it already understood. His heel lifted a fraction, then settled back instinctively, as if pulled down by a habit stronger than fear. Dwayne moved first. He didn't touch Jason. He touched the room. One broad palm came up, open, quiet. He swept it across the semicircle like a stagehand lowering lights. "Phone's down," he said, conversational, almost warm, but with steel underneath. "Everybody step back 3 paces, now." No one argued. Screens dipped. Souls squeaked as bodies retreated on command. The arc widened, reshaping itself under his voice. It was the first time all day the crowd obeyed something other than its worst self. John took 1 step closer to Jason, not closing the gap completely, claiming only enough space that Jason had to choose between retreat and stillness. John's hands stayed visible, empty at his sides. "Off the book," he repeated. Then off her. Jason's jaw worked. He lifted his foot, 1 inch, then 2, and took a half step back without meaning to. Mia pulled the journal toward her and stood, breath trembling. She didn't move behind John. She didn't move at all. She clutched the book to her ribs like a shield, planted in the same rectangle of light that had been chosen to humiliate her. "Good," John said. "Now hands where I can see them." Jason spread his fingers chest high. His smirk tried to return and found no place to sit. "We were just messing around," he said. His voice was small now, confused by the acoustics of consequence. "No big deal." Dwayne's head tilted, the way you study a problem before solving it. "Does she look like she's laughing?" he asked, voice cooling a degree. Jason glanced at Mia and looked away too fast. "Didn't think so," Dwayne said. He shifted a half step, and the semicircle shuffled farther back as if pulled by a tide. He didn't have to say, "Keep backing up." The floor remembered how to give. John's eyes never left Jason's. "Here's what no big deal looks like," he said. "You're going to lower your hands. Slowly. You're going to take 2 steps to your right, away from her, then you're going to stop moving unless someone with a badge tells you to move again." Jason nodded once, a jerky dip. He started to drop his hands. There was a flicker, maybe a reflex, maybe a last spasm of bravado, where his right shoulder twitched forward as if to reclaim space with a shove he hadn't earned. John was already there. He didn't hit him. He didn't need to. His left foot anchored, His hips turned a quarter. His right hand rose just enough to meet Jason's wrist at the moment of intention. A small rotation, gentle, controlled, a door closing on soft hinges, and Jason's arm came off its line and down, harmless. John's other hand settled on Jason's tricep, not squeezing, only owning the option to squeeze. The movement was clean and quiet and over before some eyes could follow it. "Stop," John said. Jason stopped. Surprise cracked through the varnish of his certainty. It wasn't pain that quieted him. It was the discovery that his body could be persuaded without being hurt, that the force he believed in had limits he didn't. Dwayne used the stillness to talk to the rest of the room. "Look at your hands," he said. "If one of them is holding a phone, ask yourself who you are in this story. If you don't like the answer, fix it." A few students glanced down, guilty. A few slid their phones into their back pockets as if hiding a weapon they no longer wanted. Jason tried again, a small jerk like a fish that hasn't realized the hook is set. John's grip shifted a fraction, less than an inch, and the attempt died in his wrist. John didn't lean in. He didn't loom. He just stood there with a patience that felt like stone. "You're done," John said, not unkind, and the tone did more damage to Jason's posture than any shove could have. "I didn't," Jason started. "Listen," John said, and the word was a key turning. "You're not going to explain this away. Not to me, not to her. You put your hands on someone smaller because you thought no one would tell you no. I'm telling you no." He let go of Jason's wrist and stepped back a half foot. It was a gift of distance. It was also a line Jason knew not to cross. "Take 2 steps to your right," John said again. Jason obeyed. The 2 friends who had flanked him drifted farther along the lockers, suddenly fascinated by the floor. Dwayne turned slightly toward Mia without taking his eyes fully off the room. "You good standing?" he asked, quiet enough to be just for her. She found her voice and surprised herself with how steady it sounded. "Yes." "Good," he said. "Breathe." She did, and air came. John looked past Jason to the ring of faces. His gaze didn't accuse, it measured. "Some of you are scared right now," he said. "Good. Keep the part that belongs to conscience. Throw away the part that belongs to shame. Shame makes you hide. Conscience makes you move." He pointed, not at a person, but at a space between 2 lockers where the crowd's curve bulged. "You 3, make a lane. You, go get a teacher. You, water now." No bark, no bite, just the cadence of direction from someone who has done more dangerous things than this and knows the order of operations. The kids moved, relieved to be told what to do that wasn't watch. Jason found his voice again, thin with anger that had nowhere safe to go. "You don't even go here," he said, and the line sounded small in the big room. John almost smiled. "She does," he said, tipping his chin toward Mia. "That's enough for me." Dwayne looked at Jason like a man inspecting a faulty part. "You think being loud is the same thing as being strong," he said. "It isn't. Loud is easy. Strong is restraint." Jason's mouth opened, closed. He shot a look to the semicircle for backup and found only eyes that refused to hold his. The old economy had crashed. His currency didn't spend in this market. "Here's what happens next," John said, practical as a checklist. "You stay right there. You don't talk, you don't move. An adult from this school is going to come. You're going to listen to them. You're going to call your parents. And you're going to learn that there are lines you don't cross again." He didn't add or else. He didn't have to. The promise was in the way he stood, in the fact that he still hadn't raised his voice. A teacher appeared at the edge of the gathering, breathless, keys jangling. She took in the scene. The widened ring, the phones away, Mia clutching the journal, Jason against the lockers with his hands finally at his sides, and her eyes flashed with something that looked like fury and relief. "Thank you," she said to John and Dwayne, voice steadying as it moved. Then to Jason, "You. Office. Now." Jason didn't move. Dwayne took one step into the sunlight. It turned the planes of his face into hard geometry. "You heard her," he said. "No threat, just gravity." Jason went. The semicircle held for a second more, like a photo refusing to become a video again. Then its pieces remembered how to be students. They exhaled. They looked anywhere but at Mia. They began to move in the directions a bell would have told them to go, even though no bell had rung. Mia hadn't moved. The journal was against her, the photograph a rectangle of heat under the cover. John turned toward her finally, and in the process his face, till now all stone, softened to something she recognized more than the shape of his shoulders, concern that made room for her, not just the problem. "You with me?" he asked. She nodded. Her throat prepared to fail her and then didn't. "I'm okay." He glanced at her neck, at the places where fear had left its fingerprints. He didn't touch her there. He touched her shoulder instead, a weight that said, "Hear more than hush." "Good," he said. "We'll keep it that way." Dwayne looked down the hall where Jason had disappeared and then back at the faces that still watched from doorways and corners. "Before we walk," he said, addressing the air that had become a classroom, "one more thing. Watching someone get hurt and calling it not my business doesn't make you neutral. It makes you useful to the worst person in the room. If you can't be brave alone, be brave together. Phones down, people up." The line didn't land like a cheer. It landed like a weight settling into the right groove. Heads dipped. A few eyes shone, not with tears exactly, but with the sting of learning something too late. The teacher who'd arrived cleared her throat, found her roll, and began to shepherd kids away with the authority of a tide. "Let's go, everyone. Show is over. Back to class." No one booed, no one clapped. They left like people leaving a courthouse. John angled his shoulder to give Mia the path, not taking it for her, only making sure it existed. She took a step, then another. The hall parted as if it had learned new manners in a single afternoon. They didn't speak as they walked through the rectangle of sun and into the cooler shade beyond. The echo of their footsteps was the only sound for a dozen paces. Mia's breathing evened. The journal beneath her arm felt heavy again in the right way, like something that anchored her rather than something she had to guard. At the far end of the corridor, just before the corner turned the scene into memory, John looked once over his shoulder at the space where Jason had stood, where the phones had hovered, where the worst version of a room had tried to make itself law. His face didn't harden. It didn't soften. It set. "Strong isn't who takes," he said under his breath, almost to himself, almost to Mia, almost to anyone who'd learned to listen. "Strong is who stops." They rounded the corner together, and the hallway exhaled again, this time not with appetite, but with something closer to relief, the way a body relaxes once a cramp releases. The bright rectangle at the center of the floor remained, a stage without an actor. For a long moment, it held only the memory of two measured rhythms of steps entering it, and the certainty that whatever script had ruled this corridor until today had just been rewritten. The next morning, Ridgewood High wasn't the same school. The fluorescent lights buzzed as always, the lockers still clanged like metal drums, but the atmosphere carried something heavier than routine. What had happened in the hallway lingered in whispers, in sidelong glances, in the silence that trailed Mia as she walked past. No one laughed this time. No one reached for their phones. They knew the shape of their guilt, and it pressed down on them more than any teacher's scolding ever could. Word had spread faster than any announcement could manage. Jason Miller had been pulled straight to the principal's office after the confrontation. His parents had been called that same night. He was suspended, indefinitely, though everyone speculated what that meant. Some said he'd never come back. Others thought he'd return, but smaller, shadowed, broken. Whatever the truth, one fact anchored itself in the student body: Jason wasn't untouchable anymore. And the video, because of course there was a video, escaped anyway. No command from Dwayne Johnson could erase every copy. Someone had pressed send before lowering their phone. By dawn, clips had made their way onto social platforms. Jason sneering, Jason's foot crushing the photo, Jason freezing as John Cena bent his wrist with surgical precision. The final shot lingered most. Mia standing with the journal pressed to her ribs, sunlight cutting across her face, while the two men flanked her like immovable pillars. The comments were merciless. This guy thought he was tough? Watch him melt. Cena didn't even hit him. That's real strength. The Rock, making kids drop their phones. Legend. For the first time, the mockery wasn't aimed at her. At school, the administration scrambled to respond. An emergency assembly filled the auditorium, the air tense as the principal addressed the crowd. Posters about respect everyone suddenly had teeth. Teachers who had once walked past muttered bullying now watched the halls with sharper eyes. It wasn't just Jason on trial. It was the silence of an entire school. Then John and Dwayne returned, not as rescuers this time, but as speakers. They stood side by side on the stage, not larger than life, but human in their presence, speaking with calm certainty. John's voice carried the weight of discipline. You all saw what happens when cruelty is left unchecked. Some of you laughed, some of you filmed, most of you did nothing. Doing nothing doesn't make you neutral. It makes you part of the problem. Strength isn't in throwing punches or holding someone down. Strength is in control, and standing up even when it's hard. Then Dwayne stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the students. Phones don't save people. People do. If you were brave enough to record, you can be brave enough to step forward. Be the one who says, enough. Even if your voice shakes. Especially if your voice shakes. The room was quiet, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The words found their marks. And then Mia did something no one expected. She stood, her knees trembled, but her voice didn't. She turned to face the crowd, the same faces that had once turned away from her. I didn't want to be saved by heroes, she said. I wanted my classmates to care, to see me, to stop it before it got this far. Yesterday, I felt like I was nothing more than an audience for someone's cruelty. But I'm done being a shadow. I will not be silent again. None of us should. Her words echoed longer than the speeches. She wasn't John Cena. She wasn't Dwayne Johnson. She was Mia Cena, herself, unhidden. For the first time, her voice carried weight in the place where it had always been ignored. The aftermath unfolded quickly. Jason's suspension turned into an expulsion after multiple complaints from other students surfaced. Teachers began mandatory training on intervention. The school introduced an anonymous reporting system, plastering QR codes on the walls, and among the students, something subtle shifted. The next time a shove happened in a hallway, 2 kids stepped in. The next time laughter rose at someone else's expense, it stuttered and died. The silence that once protected bullies began to break. Mia walked through the same corridor a week later, the journal still under her arm, the photo repaired with tape inside its cover. Students looked at her differently now, not with pity, not with ridicule, but with recognition. Some nodded. Some whispered apologies. She didn't need their words, but she accepted them. At the far end of the hall, John and Dwayne waited for her, arms crossed, proud smiles softening the steel of their faces. She joined them, and for once she didn't feel like she was walking behind their shadows. She felt like she was walking beside them. That day, Ridgewood High learned a truth carved deep into the bones of its hallways. Power doesn't belong to those who take, but to those who protect. And Mia, once invisible, had found her voice in the silence they had all feared. She had become more than a shadow. She had become a spark.